Welcome to the day 3 of Selenium Training. In the first 2 days, we have seen the basics of C#, loops, arrays, functions and all. So today we'll be starting with the concepts of object-oriented programming language. Object-oriented programming is very important because the new version of Selenium, which is WebDriver, is purely object-oriented in nature. You have to learn object-oriented programming in order to learn Selenium and in order to learn the architecture of Selenium. In many interviews, the first question that is asked is explain the architecture of Selenium. So until or unless you don't know the concepts of object-oriented interfaces, classes and all, you cannot explain the architecture of Selenium. So we'll be starting with the module 3, the concepts of object-oriented programming. In this, we'll see local variable, global variable, static and non-static variable, how to create the objects and all. Right, so I make a new project in Visual Studio. Called module 3. Okay, and inside the module 3 project, I'll just rename this program.cs class file with static and non-static. Okay, so now we'll see what is static and non-static. What does static mean and why do we need it? What all can be static? Okay, so in a class, this static and non-static, main is known as the static function. Why? Because of the keyword static being associated with this function, right? So similarly, we can make our own functions as well. Say I create my own function, static function, public static void sum. Okay, so this sum function is also a static function. It is also a static function because static keyword is associated with this function as well. Okay, so what is static? This I will tell you in few minutes, just be with me. Okay, and if I make another function, say I make another function as public void send mail. Okay, now this function out here, it is a non-static function. It is a non-static function because no static keyword is associated with this function. So it is known as the non-static function. Okay, so there are two types of functions. One is static function and the another one is non-static function. Okay, and similarly there are variables inside the class as well. There's something like local variable. If I declare a variable inside the sum function as int x is equal to 100. Okay, so this variable out here is known as the local variable. This is known as the local variable that is present inside the function, and it can only be used inside this function only. Local variables can be in static function as well as in non-static function. These can be declared in static as well as non-static function. Okay, so this function, this variable out here is also a local variable. Okay, local variable means the life of this variable is inside this function only. It cannot be accessed outside this function. Okay, so now there is something like global variables as well. Global variables are present inside the class but outside the function. That is, these are present parallel to the functions. Okay, generally these are declared at the top of the class in the very beginning of the class. Okay, so you can say that global variable are used across all the functions. But with some conditions. Okay, so there are some conditions. If global variables satisfy those conditions, then they can be used across all the functions. Okay, so I'll create a global variable like string name. Okay, so this is known as a non-static global variable. Okay, so this name variable out here is a non-static global variable. Okay, now similarly if I write static int age, okay, so this variable out here is known as a static global variable. It is a static global variable, this age variable. Okay, so there are two types of functions. One is static function and another one is non-static function. And there are two types of global variables, static global variable and non-static global variable. Fine, and there is something called local variable as well, which is neither static nor non-static. You cannot declare local variable as a static global variable. Okay, if you declare a local variable as static, it will give you an error saying that the modifier static is not valid for this term. Okay, so it will display you an error. Okay, so you cannot have local variable as static local variable. Fine. So now what is static? You will get more clear when we'll create a new class and explain the concept of objects. Okay, so now moving on towards the rules. There are some rules associated with this static variable, that is, static function can only access static stuff. Okay, so that is, I write static function can only access static stuff. By static stuff, I mean that it can only access static global variable and static functions. That is, I can call some function inside the main function. I can call this sum function inside the main function, right? But I cannot call the sendMail function inside the static main function. I cannot call this function. It will display us an error saying that an object reference is required for the non-static field, method or property. Okay. Similarly, I can access the static age variable. Fine, but cannot access the name variable out here. Okay, if I just console it, age variable, then you can access the age variable, but you cannot access the name variable out here, the non-static name variable. Okay, so static function can only access static variables and functions. Okay, so there is no rule associated with the non-static stuff. For example, in the sendMail function, if I copy all this and I try to access all these properties, then you can just access all of them inside the non-static sendMail function. You will not get any error inside this sendMail function. Okay, so the rule is static can only access static stuff. But why it is like that? Let's go into the depth of this. Okay, so I'll create a new class. I'll add a new class known as, say, car. Okay, so it is a very simple, very basic example I'll tell you, which will help you understand the concept of oops. Okay, so inside the car class, I'll just declare it public. Okay, and inside the car class I declare some functions for the car. Now what can a car do? A car can start. Fine, so I declare a function as public void start. Okay, so this start function out here is a non-static function, right? And similarly, what can a car do? A car can accelerate. So I make another function as accelerate function, public void accelerate, and this function is also a non-static function. Okay, both are the non-static functions out here. And similarly, I just declare one main function also inside this class, public static void main. Okay, and I write console.read key inside it. Okay, now both these functions are non-static function except the main function, which is a static function. Okay, now why the main function is static function, this also I'll tell you in just few minutes. Okay, now these are the two functions of the car. Similarly, car has got some properties as well. Say a car has got the model of the car, so we declare one variable property of the car as the model, string model. Then we have the price for the class, price, and we have another property as wheels. Okay, so these all properties are of the car class are global properties. Okay, so these are the global variables that are declared inside the class. Okay, these all are the global variables. Okay, now inside the main function we can do something known as creating the object of the class. Creating the object of the class. So how to create the object of the class? Okay, we create the object of the class by declaring new car. Okay, so new car, it creates the object of the class car in the memory. Okay, now what exactly happens in the memory, what does it do is that now you can create any number of objects as you want. You can create as many objects as you want. Say I create more object of the car class. Okay, okay, so in memory what gonna happen is that I'll just tell you. If suppose this is an object of the car class, okay, and this object then there will be a memory location. This is the object of the car class, so there will be a memory location associated with this object, and in this object all the non-static stuff resides. All the non-static stuff will reside inside this object. So it will have all the properties of the car class, that is model, price, wheels, and similarly the two functions of the car class, that is start function and the accelerate function. Okay, so all the five fields, all the five non-static fields are present inside it. And if I create three objects of the car class, then in the memory three objects will be placed like this. Okay, and all these three objects will have all the five non-static properties inside the object in the memory. Okay, so this is what is the basic concept of the object. Now why do we create the objects? Okay, why do we create the objects? If suppose I just I write car C1 is equal to new car. Okay, so like as I told you that this new car is the object of the class car. Okay, and this C1 is the reference to that object. C1 is not the object. Many people thinks that C1 is the object, but C1 is the reference to the object. It is not the object. Fine. So that means that, like, this is the object of the car class, so C1 is the reference to the object which will point towards that object in memory. Okay, so C1 is the reference to the object which is pointing towards the object. So then you can access all the non-static things with the help of C1. That is, you write C1 dot model is equal to Mercedes, then C1 dot price is equal to price, then you write C1 dot wheels is equal to 4, and similarly you can access the two functions of the car class, C1 dot start and C1 dot accelerate. Okay, so this is how you can just access all the non-static things with the help of the C1 class. Now similarly I can create one more object of the car class, C2 is equal to new car, and I access all the properties of the car class. C2 dot model is equal to Maruti, and C2 dot price is equal to price, and C2 dot wheels is equal to 4, and similarly the two functions of the car class. Okay, so what I am doing, I am just handling the another object as well, the second object of the car class. Okay, so and then you can simply write console dot write line C1 dot model. Okay, and we write console dot write line C2 dot model. Okay, so what is actually happening is that now this is the second object of the car class, so C2 will now point towards this second object, and it will also have all the properties of the car class, model, price, wheels, start function and the accelerate function. Okay, it will also have all the properties of the car class, and C2 will be pointing towards this second object. Okay, so when I run my code, I'll just comment this. Okay, now to comment the code, we have the shortcut for the comments is that Control plus K plus C. Okay, you press Control plus K plus C in order to comment your code. Okay, so I just commented out the main function inside the static and non-static class, and now when I run my code, so here you see that it prints the model of the C1 car and the C2 car, that is Mercedes and Maruti. Okay, so similarly you can print the price as well, C1 dot price and C2 dot price. Okay, so there is a kind of virtualization inside it. You just create the variable once, and with the help of objects you can just actually initialize every variable more than once with the help of the objects. Okay, so I just told you about the non-static stuff. Okay, that now again I just told you about the non-static stuff. Now C2 has all as we know that all the cars will have got has 4 wheels inside it. Okay, now suppose you are creating 1000 objects of the car class. Okay, then you will have to initialize each and every object. So inside the start function, what we can do is that I write console dot write line model starting. Okay, and in the accelerate function I write model accelerating. Okay, and when I run this, let's just debug it for the time being. I'll put a breakpoint inside this start function. Okay, and let's just debug it. So when I press the start button, so you will see that the control stops here on this breakpoint. Okay, so you hit F11 key and here you see that it goes inside the start function. It goes inside the start function. Now when you press F11 key, you press F11, okay, so and then in order to directly run your code you press F5. Okay, so when you press F5 you look at the output. So here you see that it prints Mercedes starting, Mercedes accelerating, Maruti starting, Maruti accelerating. Okay, it is because this model okay, now this model out here inside the start function, this model will be the model of C1, because C1 is calling the start function, and in the start function we are printing the model. Okay, so this is just a basic example of what an object is. Okay, object is something which contains all the non-static stuff. It contains all the non-static stuff inside it. Now coming over to static, what is static? You know very well that all the cars will gonna have 4 wheels. All the cars would have 4 wheels. So whenever you create the object of the car class, you will have to unnecessarily occupy the memory with the wheels variable being declared as 4. Okay, you will have to unnecessarily occupy the memory. So wheels is something which is common for all the objects, right? So what I will do is that I will remove the wheels variable. I will remove the wheels variable from every object, and will keep the wheels at a common location, at a common memory location, and initialize it to 4. Fine, so that all the objects can access it directly from here. All the objects can access it from the common memory location, right? So how do I do it? I do it by making the wheels variable as static. Okay, I declare static int variables. Now wheels will not be a part of the object. It will be common for all the objects of the class car. Okay, now you can initialize directly over here, or you can initialize inside the functions as well when you will be calling the wheels variable. Okay, so now coming over to static. Okay, what is static? Now inside this main function, if I write console.writeLine wheels, okay, and now in order to access the static variables, you cannot call the static variables with the help of the objects. Okay, this is not a good practice in order to call the static variables. Okay, so I'll just comment this for the time being and will tell you how to call the static variables. Okay, so in the main function, what I am doing right now, I am consoling the wheels variable, and when you run your code, you press continue, so you see that it prints 4. Okay, it prints the value of the wheels variable as 4. Okay, now few minutes back I just told you that static can only access static stuff. Okay, static things inside it. It cannot access the non-static values. So if you try in the previous example, I told you that if you try to access the sum or the age variable, or the age, you can if you try to access the sum or the age variable, then it is easily accessible inside the main function. But the name variable and the send mail function, you cannot do that. They are not accessible inside the static main function, right? So similarly is the case in this. We are calling the static wheels variable. Now if I try to access the price variable out here, okay, so here you will get an error. It gives you an error because price is a non-static variable and you cannot access the non-static variable inside the static main function. Okay, now when we have written the wheels, we know that the wheels is not the part of the object. It is common for all the objects. But when we are printing the price is a non-static variable and non-static has to reside in an object. Non-static is the property of an object. So it gets confused which price are you talking about or which model are you talking about, right? So inside the, like, as we know that this start is a non-static function, that's why we can access the model function out here. Since this start is a non-static function and model is a non-static variable, so model is easily accessible in the start function, but this model is not accessible inside the static main function, right? So this is one concept. Now you can access the wheels variable with the help of the class. Okay, so I'll just tell you. Now if you write console.writeline car.wheels, then you can access the wheels variable simply like this as well with the help of the class name, the name of the class. Okay, so this is how you print. Now if so now when you run your code, you see that it prints 4 and 4. The wheels is being declared as 4. Fine. Okay, now when I write car.wheels is equal to 8, okay, and similarly simply I just run both these lines again. Okay, and when I run my code, so it will print 4 4 and 8 8. Okay, so this is okay, how you can just change the value of the wheels variable. Fine, because wheels is static and static is common for all the objects. So inside every object of the car class for C1 and C2, the value of the wheels variable would change to 8. Okay, so similarly we can make another functions inside the car class, like I make one static function known as public static void fill gas. Okay, function which every car class has got inside it. Okay, and this function inside this function will pass on the quantity of the gas which we want to fill. Okay, so this function fill gas function is a static function. It is a static function and you can simply call this function directly inside the main function. Okay, and you pass on the quantity of the gas that you want to enter. Okay, and similarly you can directly call this fill gas function directly, or you can call it with the name of the class, that is car. Okay, like I told you, car dot fill gas, and you give on the quantity of the gas. Okay, so this is how you can just access the static things, static variables and functions with the help of the class name, or you can call it directly. Okay, but non-static function have to be called with the help of the objects. Those functions, it cannot be called directly with the name of the variable or the functions. The non-static things have to be called with the help of the object. Okay, so till now we have seen what is static, why do we need static, and why do we need non-static, what objects are, how can you create objects, what are the advantages of objects. So now we'll look into why the main method is static in nature. Okay, now over here if you look at this main function is static in nature. We know that static things can be called with class name dot variable name, right? So you can call the main function with the class name dot function name. So when C# is executing the code, it calls the main function without creating the object of the class. And as you are able to call the main function without creating the object of the class, the compiler of the C#, okay, now the compiler of the C#, it is not mandatory. The compiler assumes that there's no need to create the object of the class, and it just calls the main function directly. Fine. So now let's move forward to another topic, that is difference between object and object references. Okay, so